Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Nandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramhamsa Parivrajaka Stotara Shafta Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravinda Bhakti Vedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Anandakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai ISKCON Guru Vrinda Ki Jai Prem Sikoho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shaimakunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Shri Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Shri Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai New Govardhan Dham Ki Jai Ganga Maya Ki Jai Yamuna Maya Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Brihat Mridanga Srila Prabhupada's Transcendental Books Distribution Ki Jai Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai Prashadam Distribution Ki Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the divine lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Hare Krishna, like that. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you, Vijay Prabhu, for asking me to speak again. I hope it's okay. Nice to be here with everybody. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, we'll be reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th canto, 25th chapter, 16th verse. Interesting. Okay. And no problem. Yeah, no problem. And in any event, also Vijay Prabhu pointed out to me when he kindly asked me that today's the day that Srila Prabhupada boarded the Jaladuta, and he requested me to speak a little bit about that. And I really couldn't possibly think of anything more important to speak about, so we'll speak about that a little bit, and then we'll also go to the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is obviously our most important scripture. But, you know, when we talk about the history of the world, of course, different people will think of different things that are significant. But, you know, there's short-term and there's long-term, you know, things that have meaning. There's things that have meaning locally, regionally, nationally, internationally, right? But the magnitude of what happened today, on this day, in 1965, it just, you know, makes all other red letter dates go down. You know, like there's, although it may not be fully appreciated yet by the masses of people of the world, this is a very, very important day, because today, Srila Prabhupada, he got onto the Jaladuta ship from Calcutta, and he took, I believe, was it like a 31-day journey, or quite a long journey, across, you know, through the Arabian Sea. Well, I guess he went out from Calcutta, down around, I think they stopped in Sri Lanka briefly, went up down the Bay of Bengal to Sri Lanka, up the Arabian Sea. They stopped, I believe, in Cochin, at which time 3 trunks of Srila Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavatams were loaded. I believe it was 600 volumes, is that correct? Yeah, like 200 sets. Prabhupada, before he left India, he armed himself with he translated the first canto in 3 volumes. Actually, I was very fortunate the other day. We were visiting with some devotees, and they had the first 2 volumes of the Delhi Bhagavatams. I mean, every time I see a used bookstore, I go in there and look, you know, because you never know. When I was a brahmachari here in the, I don't know, 80s at some point, one fellow brahmachari went into a used bookstore downtown and came back with a Delhi Bhagavatam, and boy, were we in ecstasy, you know. So whenever, you know, if you ever see a big used bookstore, just go in there and say, this is what I'm looking for. And so Dravida Prabhu has a full set also. So these are really worth, you know, looking at. These are, you know, wonderful. So Srila Prabhupada, he translated, like he was first he was distributing back to Godheads in India to get the message of his spiritual master and the Vaishnava Parampara, the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, out. And as he was distributing in the streets of Delhi and different places, you know, different people were appreciative of his service. And at one point, one of his avid readers suggested that he write books, because books are even more meaningful than magazines in the sense that people will keep them for many, many years, go back to them again and again, they'll even be passed down in families. So books have a very long-term, you know, significance, right? So Prabhupada took that seriously. He wrote Easy Journey to Other Planets initially, and he began translating the srimadbhagavatam. And one of the people, the way it worked in those days, you'll read in the Lilamrita, but they had an interesting system where an author could, raise some funds, get books printed, and then as they sold them, they could get more of them from the printer. So Prabhupada was doing like that. He would print one volume at a time. He would go out and distribute them. And when he had sufficient funds, he would try to get a donor to make the down payment, so to speak, for the next volume. So in the course of that, he had heard about this Sumati Mukherjee. She was a pious shipping magnate in Bombay, right? And seeing big people is never easy, right? You can't just go to some very big influential person and just show up and see them. Usually not the case, But Srila Prabhupada was very determined. He tried to see this person. They had a whole block of offices in Bombay. And he was, somewhat rebuffed, but he was determined. And he actually sat down on the steps. This is in Bombay. I don't know what month it was, but it was very, very hot. And gradually everybody in the office is noticing this sadhu sitting out there. And finally the word came to the top person that this very sincere sadhu is wanting to see you. And he's waiting. He's sitting in the hot sun like that. So then they brought Prabhupada in, and there was a Mr. Chokshi, I believe, her secretary, and he was very impressed with Srila Prabhupada. So ultimately he got to see her, and she was very impressed with Srila Prabhupada and his mission, and she gave a down payment. Was that for the third volume? I'm not sure which volume, but anyway, it wasn't the first, but it was one of the three volumes. So then they had established this relationship. So once Prabhupada had the 3 volumes printed, and he had there was a chance of him to go to Japan to this World Religions Conference. He tried very hard. Krishna didn't quite arrange that, but out of that actually came Light of the Bhagavat. Amazing transcendental literature that Prabhupada had put together for that conference. And so anyway, Prabhupada, got this his determination. Like Satsvarup Maharaj in the Lilamrita, he calls the first volume a lifetime in preparation. So Prabhupada was preparing for this red letter date today when he was actually going to go out from India. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, when they met, and anyway, I'm getting a little diverted there. So anyway, he came back when he was ready to go to America to take this on. So much struggle, getting a passport, getting a visa, right? P-form, yeah, that no objection certificate, that he could leave the country, he didn't have debts, or there was no, so many difficulties. But anyway, Prabhupada, he approached this again to Sumati Mukherjee and told her about his mission and asked her to give him a berth on her ships, which are regularly going to New York. And she refused because she said, Swamiji, you're so old, you have no idea. You go to America, it's just a bunch of rakshasas jumping around eating meat and drinking bourbon, and you're not going to find the reception like you have here. You can't just go, like that. So she was dissuading him, but he was very determined and ultimately convinced her, So then, that was done. But you see Prabhupada got on that ship today, but it was a lifetime in preparation, right? We understand when Prabhupada was born, this actually prediction was made by the astrologer that when this person grows up, they'll cross the sea, they'll open 108 temples. Like these things were actually understood. There were still pretty good astrologers at that time. Of course, that's there, but then Prabhupada's parents were Vaishnavas, great Vaishnavas. He said his father was a pure devotee, and they raised him in pure devotional service. If you look at Prabhupada's life, as a little boy, he was worshipping deities. He was putting on Rathayatras. He was performing kirtan at the Rathayatras. He was engaging his friends in Sankirtan. He was organizing everybody in the neighborhood to put on Rathayatras. Like Prabhupada was doing all these things, even as a young boy, right? He was a pure devotee, and his father would have sadhus practically come to their home every day, and he would feed them, and they would, the idea is there that there's some blessing is offered by the sadhu to the grihastha, and the only blessing he ever asked for was, please bless my son that he may become a pure devotee of Srimati Radharani, right? So this was Prabhupada's childhood, he was raised in that way. And I think once Srila Prabhupada said that actually all of these activities that I've instituted in ISKCON, I actually learned from in my childhood, save for one, my spiritual master. He engaged me in preaching, right? Going out into the world and spreading this like that. So Srila Prabhupada, he spent his life preparing for this, and I think I mentioned it the other day when I gave class, but this is another opportunity to mention it again. When he met his spiritual master, he became so convinced. He went in as a nationalist, a follower of Gandhi, also a devotee by nature, by birth, by culture, and he was very respectful, but he felt that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's assertion that he should spread the teachings of Lord Chaitanya to the English-speaking world was premature. He said, look, we're a dependent country, and who's going to listen to us? We're like servants of the British. Who's going to listen to your Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message, right? That was his first we have to have independence, and that was the mood of the day. Any intelligent young Indian, young people are idealistic, they want positive change, they want to see a better world. So they wanted to get these British overlords off of them. And in Prabhupada's case, it was so that their pristine Vedic culture could be practiced and promulgated like that, so that they wouldn't be diverted by, the Western ways, drinking and smoking and eating meat and all this nonsense, right? So, his motives were pure, but that's how he was feeling at that time. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta convinced him that actually Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message is so important. It cannot wait for a change in politics. It can't wait for anything. Like this message is the most important thing. And he convinced him. So, as after they left, his friend who had, I think Naren, his friend who had brought him there, said, so what do you think? And Prabhupada said, he's very, very, Lord Chaitanya's message is in the hands of a very wonderful person. And Prabhupada said, from that time I accepted him as my spiritual master, not officially, but in my heart. So this is in 1922. Prabhupada was married, he had a son. He was the manager of a very prominent laboratory, chemical laboratory, making medicines and tonics and things in Calcutta. And the next day, as recounted in, I think I mentioned the other day, as recounted in Bhakti True Maharaj's book, Ocean of Mercy, the next day he went to his boss and said, I'm here to tender my resignation. And his boss was like flabbergasted, Dr. Bose, you have this great job, you have this, why is it that you want to resign? You have a wife, you have a son, what's going on? And Srila Prabhupada said, because I am working for you, I have to give my time to you. But now I've found my spiritual master, and he's given me a lifetime mission, and I need to serve him also. So I want to become self-employed so that I have more control of my time, and so that hopefully I'll make more. And Prabhupada said many times that his idea was that he would make adequate resources through his business, and he would use that to go abroad and to spread the message of Lord Chaitanya as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had ordered him, right? That was his idea. So he took it so seriously. He was immediately beginning to embark on carrying out that order. And I was reading also in Bhakti True Maharaj's book, it was interesting, one doctor who had known Prabhupada in the early 30s in Allahabad when he had his... So that's what Prabhupada did, actually. The man said, well, don't, you can resign, but become our agent, so you can be self-employed and become our exclusive agent for North India. So Prabhupada accepted that, and he moved to Allahabad. So he had his pharmacy there, and he had his whole factory there, and he was, traveling, marketing these products and things like that, developing his business so that he would have the resources for his service. But anyway, there was one doctor there at that time, and I think it was Dr. Ganguly, but I might be wrong on the name. Well, Obiel Kapoor is one, but there was also, during Prabhupada's illness in Vrindavan, at one point, he asked for this doctor from Allahabad that he had known back then to come and treat him, and the devotees went there, and actually he was very glad to come, although he was also quite elderly. He was around Srila Prabhupada's age, but they had an intimate relationship in their youth, and when they were young men. And so the doctor came, and he was treating Prabhupada for some time in Vrindavan. And one day Prabhupada was, speaking with him because they were, catching up after 40 years or whatever, and they had known each other, when they were like in their 30s. Now they're, So, and Prabhupada was explaining to him, he said, yes, when I got the order from my Guru Maharaj, I wanted to develop my business, like when we were all in Allahabad and I was doing that factory and all that. He said, and my idea was to make money and use that to go abroad, to spread the message. He said, but it didn't work. He said, actually, when I finally went to America, I went as a pauper, Prabhupada used that word. He said, when I finally went to America, I went as a pauper. He said, but I had to carry out the order of my Guru Maharaj, and I tried my best, and after some time, I saw that Lord Chaitanya started doing all these amazing things, and the movement just started spreading like wildfire. So Prabhupada was just, telling his friend like that. Of course, it's in his humility, obviously, but he was pointing out that I had this idea, but then Krishna arranged it otherwise. And when I came there, I came like a pauper, Prabhupada said. And we know from the Lilamrita, Prabhupada arrived with 40 rupees, right? The rate of exchange at that time, I think, was about 5 to the dollar. Oh, and it wasn't exchangeable, Vijay. So good luck with that, right? Right, so, Prabhupada literally came as a pauper. But within his heart, he had the firm determination to carry out the order of his spiritual master and the parampara. And that was more valuable than anything that anyone could have brought. So again, getting back to the significance of this day and Srila Prabhupada's mission, what comes to mind for me is D-Day, right? This is a very famous thing in America. All these people in Europe had been subjugated by the Nazis, and they were suffering greatly. They were being oppressed. So there was this there was this big push to really make a game changer. And they came onto the beaches of Normandy. Actually, thousands and thousands of people died. It was, There was another one, actually. One time I visited Guam, and they had the same thing out there on Guam. The Japanese were occupying Guam, and the Allies came ashore, and it was the same thing. I actually visited this park, and there was these hillsides where the Japanese were dug in, and, they're fully armed, and these guys are coming ashore, just getting wiped out by the thousands, So, yeah, I mean, not to in any way, minimize that sacrifice. That was a huge sacrifice, right? But the type of liberation that was being offered had a very temporary effect, because although they were being liberated from subjugation by a foreign power who was viewed historically as being, very in a negative way, right? All those people are dead now. No one was freed from birth. No one was freed from death. No one was freed from old age. No one was freed from disease. Sometimes probably calls it the chain victimization of birth and death, life after life, right? So although a great push was made on that day, they celebrate this day every year, right? They have big programs in Europe, and world leaders come from all over. And this is, such an important day that these men got on these boats and they went to, confront the enemy, to liberate the people in Europe. They were coming from England, like that. So, but what Srila Prabhupada did, when he got on the boat, he actually came to liberate people not just from the sufferings that we're all meant to experience in this life, but to actually free people from the bondage of material consciousness, which causes us, and it's going to sort of ties into the Bhagavatam verse, it causes us to remain subjugated by the mind and senses and just rotating again and again, birth after birth after birth. So, this is the real welfare work. This is the real liberation, like that. Like sometimes, people would ask, what are you Hare Krishnas doing for society? And sometimes people would even ask Srila Prabhupada that. Like you see different Pandal programs and things, and Swamiji, what are you doing for, And Srila Prabhupada would explain that giving people knowledge of who they are and what is their eternal relationship with God, this is the para upakar. This is the highest welfare work. This is the welfare work that will actually make a difference, not just today. You fill somebody's belly, that's great for today, but you fill their belly with prasadam, that's great eternally, right? So what Srila Prabhupada is giving, this is the real benefit, right? So anyway, today Srila Prabhupada got on that ship after a lifetime of preparation, of determination, in many cases of frustration. We read Prabhupada, he was going around. Sometimes people were pouring ashes on him when he was going door to door, right? He got gored by a bull. He fainted from heat stroke in the hot Delhi sun. He would walk miles and miles and miles to save a few paisa to get to the printer where they were working on the proofs for his books. He would literally skip breakfast to, put the money into buying paper, so Prabhupada was preparing his entire life to get on that boat, and to come here for all of our benefit. So All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Just to end, and I hope you'll indulge me, my inspiration is Dravida Prabhu, who sometimes shares poems and things. So I'd written a poem about this once, and I just thought I'd take the liberty to share it. And I'm not a very good writer, so I apologize. But they say the darkest hour occurs just before the dawn, when ignorance breeds hopelessness, and hardly anyone can clearly see the patterns weaved, nor find the pathways laid, a ship without a rudder, filled with merry fools indeed, whose brightest minds and intellects could barely chart a course, wondering aloud, is God dead? They couldn't see the stars. Their factories' stinking poison fumes were burning in their eyes. Between the proud skyscrapers, there was very little sky. Reaching out for more and more, they dreamed to touch the moon. Their weapons, armed and aimed, had filled their hearts with doom and gloom. As leaders vied for power and dominion over all, promising relief but bringing grief, they couldn't see their fall, which screamed at them a million times from behind the slaughterhouse walls, a trickle, then a torrent, then a raging, rushing flood. Their hopes for peace and happiness washed away upon the blood. As madness brewed and Kali ruled into this strange milieu, appearing slight in saffron robes, a fighter climbed aboard. A freighter ship docked at a pier in old Calcutta town. Armed but with pen and chanting beads, could he bring Kali down? Yet in his heart a fire burned, fueled by the love and faith he cherished for his master, who'd ordered him to take the torch of light and wisdom, which lay hidden in the crates of books he'd written, meant to change the course of history. Had he not come, we shudder just to think upon our fate. So anyway, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, I believe that's what you sent me, yeah. Okay, great. Is there a... Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll read this responsibly and then just read up to 18, or what do you... Just read 18. Okay, just read it. Okay, yeah, okay, great. So you do the verse. I wanted to compliment you. I've never seen a verse for it this good, Yeah, and the daily verse is, loud and clear. Thank you. It's Hare Krishna. Okay. Well, I guess I'll say it through once, and some devotees can have the. Okay. Did earlier, yeah. Hima nirjara viprushmat kushum akara vayuna chalat pravala vitapa nalini tata sampadi. Sorry? Okay, great. Sure. Translation. The branches of the trees standing on the bank of the lake received particles of water carried by the spring air from the falls coming down from the icy mountain. Srila Prabhupada's purport. In this verse, the word Hima Nirjara is particularly significant. The waterfall represents a kind of liquid humor or rasa relationship. In the body there are different types of humor, rasa or mellow. The supreme mellow relationship is called the sexual mellow, adiras. When this adiras or sex desire comes in contact with the spring air moved by Cupid, it becomes agitated. In other words, all these are representations of rupa, rasa, gandha, shabda, and sparsha. The wind is sparsha or touch. The waterfall is rasa or taste. The spring air, kusumakara, is smell. All these varieties of enjoyment make life very pleasing, and thus we become captivated by material existence. Om Jnana Tamarandasya Ganan Ganan Shalakaya Chakshuru Militanina Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So, Vanchakalpatarubhascha Kripasamnibhya Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha. So this is continuing allegorical description Narada Muni is giving to King Prachinabharishat to open his eyes to the actual situation. And, this is very interesting because he's starting to reveal some of the intricacies of how our conditioning in this world works. And this is, people make machinery and we marvel at their inventions, right? But generally speaking, we see that all these inventions are kind of, one-ish, two-ish dimensional takes on something that's already going on in nature, right? We have these amazing, helicopters, and, I was watching a hummingbird at Mahabharat Prabhu's house the other day. They have a feeder, where there's this nectar, and the hummingbirds are coming, and, it's amazing to watch them, and I remember reading some hummingbirds, I think their wings are flapping like 700 times per minute or something, it's just, that's why they live on nectar, because when you're putting out that much energy, there's not even time to digest, you just need the rocket fuel, just pure calories, So, and, they have helicopters, so there, there's planes, there's great eagles, so all of the, things that they come out with, generally you'll see they're seeing something in nature, they're trying to, follow in that vein, right? So, it's amazing the complexities of the creation, right? So many years ago when here in SanDiego, the part of the Bhaktivedanta Institute was here. Sadhaputta Prabhu, now passed away, but wonderful devotee, Druta Karma Prabhu was here. Madhavendra Puri, he was a researcher. So there were devotees here that were very busily engaged in the scientific arm of the preaching that Srila Prabhupada wanted done, called the Bhaktivedanta Institute. They were one arm of it. And, they came out with some very amazing books, like Forbidden Archaeology in particular was something they were working on here. There was a devotee who actually joined from UCSD, and he was a very scientifically minded person, and he became their lead researcher. He would just go to those libraries every day, back and forth. Madhavendra Puri, he was a brahmachari, and, day after day after day, for years, going through all these, centuries worth of, literature, which was research. So, in the course of their, giving classes, they also came out with this magazine, Origins. Now, someone was telling me that, because it was meant for cutting-edge preaching and science, it's a bit dated now. I don't know. I'm a total layman in this. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, great. Yeah, some updating. Yeah, because, when you're preaching in those fields, you may have to update because their knowledge is updating every day practically, because it's all, so, when you're trying to couch things in their terms, So, but anyway, yeah, so this Origins magazine, it was very cutting edge, and some of the things in there were, they were pointing out some of the flaws in this theory that, everything gradually develops from nothing according to natural selection, and just like the functions of the human eye, the idea that you're going to gradually evolve in a kind of a hit or miss way and wind up with something with that complexity. I don't know what the calculation was, 1 in a million, 1 in a billion, but, there's a lot of things in human design, for instance, which are very, very complex, unlimitedly complex, and way beyond the theories that are offered to convince people that everything comes from nothing and all these kind of things. So, in Christianity, for instance, the argument from design is one of their main arguments that they offer as a counter to the idea of materialistic evolution, right? That life comes from matter, which Srila Prabhupada, put his foot on that theory very firmly. He was very, didn't like that at all. And he formed the Bhaktivedanta Institute specifically to combat this propaganda that was, being shoved down people's throats. So anyway, here in the verse and the purport, Narada Muni and Srila Prabhupada elaborating further is describing, some of the mechanics of this. This is very interesting when this Prabhupada's pointing out that the One second here, just find it. You know, the form, the taste, the smell, the touch, the sound, right? These are the sense objects. And our bodies are made in a way where we have senses, you know, we have sense organs, and there's also a subtle sense in the subtle body, right, which is receiving, and then there's the sense objects, right? And all these are working together. Prabhupada ends the purport by saying, and thus we become captivated by material existence. So all of these amazingly sophisticated, dynamic, interactive arrangements are there exactly for that purpose, to keep us captivated by material nature, because we have taken advantage of our God-given free will, and we've made the determination that I want to enjoy as Krishna rather than with Krishna, right? And so Krishna, as a kind father, is, you know, set up the play box. But because of Krishna's amazing qualities and unlimited intelligence, the play box is, you know, quite sufficient. You know, it's worlds and worlds and worlds and planets, and, you know, there's 8,400,000 different species of life. And Srila Prabhupada in one place talks about how every living being has some specific achincha shakti, some very unique quality which they have. You know, just like we're talking about hummingbirds. You know what I mean? We're talking birds. You know, like there's so many. Every living being has some unique achincha shakti, and actually these are all desirable qualities that one may desire to enjoy the material nature or lord it over other beings or whatever it is in that particular way. You know, like if you watch in nature, I mean, you ever watch a pelican? You know, these guys, they fly, they dive, they have this giant, Vijay, you're living in Miami, right? They have these giant things where they swallow a fish and it goes in there, and, you know, like, you know, it's amazing. Like if you go down to the beach and watch the birds, you know, these guys have dive bomber skills, you know, but like they dive down like that, but then like if we have our best, you know, F-15, whatever it is, if they dive like that, when they hit the water, they're not coming back up, you know what I mean? But you have these birds, they're going down like, and then they grab something and they fly back up immediately, you know, it's like, you know, it's amazing, you know, so like, obviously, you know, we can't do that, we can do something else, you know, so every living being, and these are all options, these are all opportunities for us to enjoy and exploit and, you know, interact with the world around us in unique ways. And according to our conditioning within the modes of nature, we aspire for and are ultimately awarded these opportunities, right? Our next body generally is a combination of what we desire and what we deserve, at least when we're in the human form of life, right? We have some desire. We have a desire to live in a particular way, and then we have our karma, right? And so according to our desire and our karma, that next body is waiting for us to enjoy and for us to suffer and for us to, you know, experience in ways that we had an interest in experiencing. And in every form, right, all of these senses and sense objects are interacting, and according to how we have associated ourselves with the modes of nature, we find different situations attractive or we find them repulsive, right? We have anxieties, we have, you know, interests, right? So, and you see, just like I think Balaram mentioned and Bhadran Raj elaborated further, the story Prabhupada had shared about when the Gaudiya Math devotees had gone to Burma, right? You shared that the other day, right? You know, and the devotees were cooking nice, you know, nice pakoras or puris and ghee, and the residents were, you know, and then they opened up the tap on their, you know, vat of distilled death, and, you know, they were in ecstasy, you know, they're going to have their festival, you know. So there's three modes of nature, you know, and according to how we associate with the modes, right, you know, and that's sort of the variety of life, right? So as we go on in this material world, as we perform fruitive activities, we become conditioned more and more by the modes. Going back to Sadhaputta Prabhu, the scientist who used to live here, he gave a great example about how we become so conditioned. Like there's one verse in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, like fishes caught in a net, they cannot come out, because the karmic activities we perform, they condition us more and more tightly with karmic reactions. So although we come here as a result of exercising our free will, the ability to express that free will due to the load of karma that we build up becomes more and more restricted. It's still there, but we sort of imprison ourselves almost. So Sadhuputta gave a great example. He's saying, like, you're driving in a car down the road at 60 miles an hour, right? Now, with your free will, you can say, hey, I want to turn right, without hitting the brakes or slowing down. What's going to happen? What's going to happen if you turn, a hard right at 70 miles an hour? You'll roll all the way down to the Arco station at Ingram, and they'll probably take you out with a pair of tweezers, So that's a nice example that he gave, because he's making the point that the momentum of karma, which builds up behind us as we go on trying to enjoy our sense of smell and taste and touch, and feel that nice breeze and the sun setting and the aroma of summer breeze makes me feel fine. That song was made in Encinitas, actually, but it was a big hit when I was young, So, everyone has this idea that I will enjoy in a very heavenly atmosphere with a very beautiful woman, or if I'm a woman, I'll enjoy with a very beautiful man, and we'll make beautiful music together. This idea is there, and actually it's becoming more and more impossible due to the degradation of society. But in the heavenly planets, that's there, and that's what people tend to aspire for. But the problem is that by becoming attached to all of these nice little vignettes in material nature, is that we become bound by the reactions, and we just become more and more conditioned by the modes, right? I mean, it's natural that we're all attracted to this adi rasa, or sex desire, because it's called adi, because that is the original mellow. That's the original relationship, right? That's what Radha and Krishna are sharing in the spiritual world. And real love, is such an amazing thing. In real love, one makes oneself completely vulnerable, right? And that's why, people are so afraid nowadays, because the mood has become so exploitative. People are afraid of love, because to actually experience love, you have to be vulnerable. You have to put the other person's needs above your own. You have to have so much faith and so much love. And very often, because of the way that we are misdirected in culture with this idea that, I'm the enjoyer and I'm the controller and all that, that's why Prabhupada says that the most accurate manifestation, or the purest manifestation of love, is the love of mother for the child, because it's very, it's very pure. Like, it's not expecting, it's not for me. Like, the mother loves the child and is willing. You hear those stories that, a child gets hit by a car and the mother runs out and lifts the car up. Some 120-pound housewife runs out and I've read these all my life. You've heard these kind of stories. People push trains back 2 feet and pull their kid out. It's like, so they're not expecting any return. So, this is the Adi Ras. So in the spiritual world, Lord Krishna is sharing love with his pure devotees, and there is no lust. It's pure love, right? So naturally, this Adi Ras is attractive, but here in the material world, we can only experience the perverted reflection of that, right? And that's why it's actually the most entangling. That's why most of us here, not myself, are wearing saffron, because it's understood that in cultivating spiritual life, one has to become detached from the objects of the senses, from wanting to be the enjoyer, from wanting to be the controller. And this Adi Ras is the most alluring manifestation of that desire to be the enjoyer, because it's the highest enjoyment, right? But higher enjoyment is actually to participate in our original relationship with Krishna, right? So like Prabhupada gives the example that, like Prakriti and Purusha, right? We are Prakriti, we are Krishna's energy, we are Krishna's nature, and Krishna's Purusha, he's the enjoyer. But the business between the enjoyer and the enjoyed is enjoyment. And when one is enjoying with Krishna as his eternal servant, then one experiences the actual happiness that everybody's looking for in the perverted relationships here. Because the point is that we're not the Purusha, we're not the supreme enjoyer, and we can never have that position. We are very small. We are spiritual, we are like God, but we're very, very small. And our perfection is in that harmonious relationship with God and with the other pure devotees of God. And then we can actually enjoy, we can be happy, everything is nicely done. Krishna has an unlimited potential to share love, and we're all meant to experience that love. And that's why love is attractive in this world, because we're all hankering. We're hankering for a notion of love, but in this world we're just getting little drops, right? So anyway, I think it's already a little over time because we were talking about Srila Prabhupada. So anyway, the description here is very educational, you know, how this is all working, you know. And of course we can appreciate these beautiful scenes of nature, but by appreciating them in the proper understanding that these are Krishna's energies. You know, the icy mountain is beautiful, you know, the waterfall is beautiful, the fragrant breeze in the spring is beautiful. These things are all very beautiful, and if we see them in relationship to Krishna, we can appreciate them very nicely. There's one chapter in the second canto, I believe, the first step in God realization. Is that right? And there's descriptions about how we can appreciate God through nature. And, you know, this is very, especially in the modern world, because the personal conception of God is not being promulgated enough. You know, generally thoughtful people, this is how they appreciate God. They appreciate God through the wonders of the material energy. And, you know, Bhagavad Gita, I think in the 7th and the 10th chapter, Krishna points out how we can appreciate his opulences through, you know, beautiful, wonderful, and mighty creations in his material energy. So, you know, it's in every case, it's just really putting Krishna in the center, right? We can appreciate this world if we see it in its relationship to Krishna, but we have to be careful to see it as Krishna's and not as ours. So I better end there. Dravida Prabhu? Straight up on the pillar.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Just one note. You know, I worked with the BI for a while, and this also came out in this book, Nature's IQ. Now, do you remember that book?
No.
Oh, you don't know that book? Oh,
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, there's a whole. It's just one instance after another of these amazing things in nature that couldn't have evolved.
Oh.
And the whole point of that book, and a good argument, a lot of the argument in the origins, it's based on this idea of argument from design. You know, how could it possibly, you know, be devoid of any guiding intelligence? You know, but the whole Darwinian theory, you know, has this idea of natural selection, and that the changes that take place, mutations or whatever, out of millions and millions, some of them are better for survival of the fittest, and so that then you get a gradual improvement till you get human beings. But they would one of these. I remember when we were working with Sadaputa and the others in Atlanta. That's where it started in Atlanta when they actually got organized in '78. And you have for instance, you have an organ like the eye, and you know this. It's so complicated. It has to work the lens, the whole distance, and everything. And there's no way of really, you know, having half an eye that's better than no eye. You know, It either works or it doesn't. You know, and so this Nature's IQ showed a whole bunch of these examples, how these very complex things in nature, you know, they're like intricate machines. You take one little, you know, piece of it away, and it doesn't work at all, and it doesn't convey any kind of advantage to that, you know. So the whole idea kind of falls apart when you really focus in on various intricate parts of nature.
They kind of give that idea, like they talk about the missing link, you know, this idea that there was intermediate species that sort of take it to the next, pass the baton to the next guy, and then ultimately you get the guy who can see. But Dravida Prabhu was pointing out that, like, if all the intermediate guys were blind, they by their own theory, they wouldn't have made it. You know what I mean? They would have just been like, you know, breakfast for somebody bigger who could see, you know, and that's about it. Yeah, thank you, Dravida Prabhu. Anything else? Hare Krishna, Bhakta Jamal.
Thanks. Thank you for the nice class.
Thank you, Bhakta Jamal.
So my question, it's actually regarding the first part of the class when
Sure.
we were talking about Prabhupada boarding the Jaladuta. Sorry to like shift
It's okay.
just the gears back that way. But what was Maraji? Sumati Maraji?
Yes, Sumati Maraji, sorry.
Okay. I didn't know her name. So you were discussing how she was not being antagonistic. It was coming from a good place, but she was trying to dissuade
Yes.
Srila Prabhupada from boarding the boat because there's so many risks involved and things like that. Which is like, that's a logical, and I guess you could say compassionate place to come from. Or, logical. It was coming from a logical and compassionate basis. But of course, Srila Prabhupada, on the order of his spiritual master, he would have never listened to that advice because his spiritual master told him otherwise. But how do we know if something that somebody may say to us is coming from Krishna or it's just their own thing? Like how do we
That's a very good question. You know, just like I think I mentioned the example that one of Prabhupada's readers suggested that he write books as it was a more lasting contribution, and Prabhupada accepted that as, you know, coming from, you know, the Lord or coming from his authorities as very good advice, right? So at the same time, you know, we have to see that something is clarified or confirmed, verified by Guru, Shastra, and Sadhu. That's our general rule of thumb, so to speak, because, you know, like I've had friends, for instance, the devotees I know who entering into Grihastha ashram, so then, you know, somebody might say, well, now you really have to get into economic development because that's what it's all about. And in some ways it is, right? But it also depends on the devotee, it depends on their nature, it depends on what their relationship is with the temple, with their spiritual master, with their shiksha gurus. That may not be the best advice for everybody, right? Like, you know, like I have a friend said, now go for it, you know, but like, you know, you really have to see that everything is confirmed by Guru, Shastra, and sadhus, you know what I mean? And, you know, there's shiksha gurus, there's a diksha guru, there's Srila Prabhupada, our founder, Acharya. And it's very, very important, you know, because we have to see that we accept those things that are favorable for advancing in devotional service and reject those things that are unfavorable. And, you know, sometimes we just have to be careful to verify like that, because Krishna can speak through anyone, right? Bilvamangala Thakur, he spoke through Chintamani, you know, that famous pastime. The word is used prostitute like that. But at that moment, his spiritual master, I believe from his previous life, spoke to him, right? And actually put him on the path to Vrindavan, to a personal relationship ultimately with Krishna himself, right? So, you know, that's a very amazing example that shows you, you know, how Guru can do that. But especially as we are sadhakas, we are devotees practicing devotional service, and we are taught to practice it in the association of devotees and, you know, revealing one's mind in confidence, inquiring how to advance, right? Giving shelter, receiving shelter. So we're meant to really be nourished by the sangha of the devotees. And if we can always keep ourselves in that association, and especially any really important decisions, if we can, you know, have that determination to, you know, really consult with devotees, you know, and then we're always in a very good situation in terms of making the right decisions, you know, and being able to see. Because it's not always so clear, you know, sometimes there may be something which is positive and there may be something which is negative in a particular course of action. And so by conferring with devotees who may have more experience in those areas, we may be guided, you know. That's like, I know, like in places like in, is it Bombay, in Radhanath Maharaj's, that Chalpati, they have a very elaborate organization of where every devotee practically has a mentor, right? And there's facilities that really enhance the, you know, like counseling. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, it's very, very important. These are very important devotional principles, right? Both individually, like in temples, like it's good to have ISKCON also as an organization where people get to talk about what's going on and how it's impacting and how to improve, how to go forward. So, you know, it's very, very important. These are very important devotional principles, right? Both individually, like in temples, like it's good to have ISKCON also as an organization where people get to talk about what's going on and how it's impacting and how to improve, how to go forward. So, you know, the more that we can keep ourselves, in that humble state of, being a servant of the servant, and willing to get counseling, it's really, really valuable. Does that answer your question? It's nobody's too elevated for counseling. That's something we saw in our movement, that sometimes devotees even left Krishna consciousness, and if you read very prominent devotees, and if you read their letters, very often one of the main points was that they were in a situation where somehow or other they didn't have friends, they didn't have pure counseling, they felt all alone in the end zone, so to speak, and their devotional creeper wasn't getting the nourishment it needs, because we get that nourishment from the Sangha, and from revealing our mind and getting advice and giving advice to juniors and like that, the whole science of devotional association. So we better end there. Thank you. Hare Krishna.